Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, where we'll be talking through how to grow your MSP business with secure Entra ID and endpoints with Barracuda's managed XDR suite.
Now, I think a good place to begin is always starting with, what does good look like, right? What is good cybersecurity? Now, what we know is this is always adapting, always changing, always evolving, but a really useful framework to look into would be the NIST framework, which sets it out into five different pillars. So the first pillar being identify, right? Understand what assets exist within the environment. The second pillar is protect. So now that you know what assets you've got, the next stage is building the protection. That might be products that you're purchasing, that might be policies you're putting into place, controls that you're putting into place, whatever it is to ensure that those key assets have that initial layer of protection. Now, as time has evolved, as things have gone on, unfortunately, those protection layers, although still vital, and we're not saying get rid of them or replace them, not at all. You still need them, but unfortunately, what we really know is we now need another layer to be able to evade all of the attacks that are threatening our environments. So that's detecting what's going on, processing the events, correlating events to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. We then would have response, right? You've now detected what's going on. What you now need is a way to either remediate to those responses or understand what's going on, understand the situation, understand what the potential threat could mean, what it could be, what the intention is. And then the final piece is recover, right? We've got a great set of tools available with, identifying, protecting, detecting, responding. Even if you have the best tools in the market, the best things money could possibly buy, you've, really built out all of those pillars, what you still need is backup. Backup is always the insurance policy at the end of the day that's going to help us get back online if the worst happens. Now, if we can focus in on the protect tab a little bit here, what we kind of really understand is how that has massively evolved through time. We obviously used, if we think about spam, spam filtering, that used to be a bit of kit on premise, right? A spam firewall that would protect your emails and job done. And as we know, that's massively evolved now to kind of multi layers sort of defense against email threats. And the same can be said for endpoint, right? We still see a lot of traditional kind of antivirus in use, and you know no defense is probably the worst defense, but a traditional antivirus is just not up to scratch to what actually we need in terms of defense and protection these days. Attackers know that endpoints are a massively easy way to get into an environment. Now that we've kind of moved away from traditional office environments, now we've got hybrid situations going on. Now that we've got all sorts of different variety of working sort of and consuming IT, our endpoints become really key and critical, and the attackers know that. So what we need is a next generation endpoint protection. And again, the language there, we're moving away from traditional AV and moving into next generation endpoint protection. Now, Barracuda's got the XDR managed endpoint, which would absolutely tick the boxes of being a next generation endpoint protection. And the reason is because we are combining several different tools and several different kind of best practice, industry best practice standards to give you that best protection. So step one is an AI-based solution, right? It's field-proven AI that is inspecting any application attempting to execute. So what that means is we're not relying on signatures. We're not relying on, knowing that that an application is malicious to block it. Yes, that's still important. There is still a combination of signature-based blocking happening, but actually AI is the future, as we all know. But in this situation, AI is massively helping us again understand the intention behind the application. We have automated blocking, so we maintain full control of when and where scripts are run, because we have that ability to automate the blocking to make sure that anything that's nefariously going on is still within our control, and we're not relying on a human being necessarily looking over that to ensure that it's blocked, but also automating that to give you that quickest and best level protection. We've got memory exploit protection. And what this means is we're proactively identifying malicious use of memory, right? So this is fileless attacks. We're not just looking at malicious files executed. We're also looking at the way that memory is being used, which can also be an indication of a new type of attack. And of course, zero-day protection, right? It's always going to be an ever-present requirement of ours. And this is where the AI model really helps, because now what we're doing is we are understanding the intention behind, a potential malicious payload, for example. We don't need the signature to tell us it's malicious. We've got that zero-day protection, which is constantly evolving and constantly adapting to really learn exactly what's going on within the environment. Now, the way we're doing this is through our the underlying tech flow, which I'll go through just here. Now, the Barracuda Managed Endpoint is a partnership that we have with SentinelOne. So the technology itself, the agent being used is SentinelOne. The difference is it's being managed fully by our incredible 24/7 SOC. And the incredible 24/7 SOC are really the ones who are going to be adding the difference here. Now, if we look at what's actually happening, we've got our first layer, prevent, right? That's the standard endpoint protection. We've got the static AI. It's, where the signatures may be as well. It's pre-execution. It's allowing us to understand if there is a kind of, known malicious threat, an unknown malicious threat. It's the first layer in defense. Next, we have active EDR. One step further now, right? We're detecting. So this is using autonomous behavioral AI and story tracking to, again, sort of understand the flow of an attack. This is all being done by the SOC team, right? The SOC have built out these kind of understandings. They've built out the story tracking so that we can see things like lateral movement, fileless attacks, as I mentioned, whatever it might be, exploits. All of this is, again, going into a constant learning and understanding to ensure that we're always updating. Next, we've got response, right? The R of EDR or XDR. So we've got the respond and recover, which is, as mentioned previously, there's an automated, right? We've got that automated action that is based on thresholds being met, right? Certain things give us the strong indication it's malicious. We can automate that. Or our incredible SOC team, being 24/7, have one click, easy response actions that they can take as well. And again, that's the beauty of the combination of AI with a human SOC team, because that SOC team are experts in endpoint. They understand very clearly how attacks work, and they can use all of the information that they're seeing from each 3-layer here to really understand. Now, that one click can be, kill, it can be quarantine. We can clean up an event. So if, a malicious file has been executed, we can clean that up. We can run rollbacks to undo the effect of an attack, and of course, disconnect from network. Now, the beauty is, all of this is happening within seconds. It's unnoticeable. You're not going to notice or feel this delay. I think it's useful to see the workflow to understand what's going on in the background. But actually, all of this is happening very much concurrently in a single autonomous agent, right? Not cloud reliant. We are using that SentinelOne agent to its real benefit. Now, I think the real magic happens with hunting. This next layer is kind of advanced active EDR. It's deep visibility, it's threat hunting, it's us understanding exactly what is going on within the industry, how attacks are changing, what we're seeing bad actors use as their, in their tools and in their approach to attacks, to really allow us to learn and keep learning about what the best way to prevent attacks and to protect your customers are. Now, one great example of this is something like an EDR killer. Right? It's a kind of newish type of attack that's being used. And again, attackers know a lot of companies are going to be using Microsoft Defender. So they've built attacks that they know Defender can't block. And it's that really clever and intelligent attack that we're trying to prevent constantly with endpoint protection. So one way is that our team are able to build those detection policies, and they're able to build those blocks from all that threat hunting that they're doing, from all this advanced, really understanding of the environment. We then go back, right? We understand what's going on, and we build the detection so that these kinds of attacks, EDR killers, for example, are now being blocked by that prevent. So it's constantly learning, it's constantly evolving, and it's constantly getting cleverer in order to really suit the needs that we're seeing in the industry and in the market. Now, the reality is signature-based endpoint it doesn't have the same capabilities to do the same level of protection, right? It's based on what we know. And unfortunately, what we know is very outdated. It's constantly outdated, right? Each day, there's over 400,000 malwares being produced. So nobody can build signatures against those quick enough, right? And that's the reality. What we're up against is a huge engine with unlimited resource. And what the Barracuda managed endpoint can help is by giving you the resource of the Barracuda SOC team to really help you counteract those attacks and ensure that your customers are prevented. And again, the beauty is that it's 24/7. Now, one other way that, we are, one other kind of advancement we're seeing is the way that Office 365 has adapted and changed. And again, hybrid working, reliance on SaaS environments means that we are much more reliant on Office 365. And again, unfortunately, the attackers know that, right? They know what we're reliant on. They know how our businesses operate. So what they also know is how to attack them. So when we go back to the sort of cybersecurity hygiene, you may have your protection for Office 365. That may be your email protection, for example. But this is where detect and respond becomes even more critical, because suddenly what we're looking at is not that baseline protection, but we're taking a step away to look at Office 365 as a whole. Now, if I quickly go through an example of exactly what I mean, by looking at Office 365 as a whole. What we have here is a real world example, a customer who had a phishing attack. So what we have is a phishing email that was delivered to a staff member's mailbox. This staff member reviewed the mail, they thought it was 365, they clicked the link, they logged in. This would also, allow the attacker to bypass MFA because the user thought they were logging into 365, which meant they, gave their codes away and they used, whatever it was, whatever MFA they were using to authenticate the access. So the attacker then captured the information and they used that to access the user's 365 account from an unusual location and device. This is all happening really quickly. They then created an inbox rule to hide and filter data. Now, hopefully, I'm not, alone in saying that this is a very typical attack, right? This is very usual. Unfortunately, phishing emails are getting cleverer and cleverer and harder to spot. Again, the use of AI means things like language is much clearer and cleaner. We're not spotting grammatical errors. So we are seeing a rise in phishing emails again, just because of the way that they're able to sneak through our defenses. And again, attackers are designing them to sneak through that traditional defense. Nonetheless, the traditional defense did alert the customer, right? The email protection solution in place did detect this suspicious activity and alerted the customer. Unfortunately, our poor customer was very overworked, as I'm sure we all are, loads going on. They ignored it. They assumed that if this was a real attack, they'd have had another indication. Something else within their environment would have let them know that this attack was going on. 4 days later, the attacker used the mailbox to send a phishing campaign out to their suppliers and customers. And that is when our IT manager could no longer ignore the situation. They worked with their email security provider to sort of disable the account, remediate and everything. Now, again, this is very sort of typical, unfortunately. You're right. This is nothing groundbreaking. This is nothing brand new to anybody, hopefully. But the good news is this is preventable. Now, with XDR, the way we're collecting logs with our cloud SKU and our cloud module, we are able to detect those suspicious sign-ins. So 30 seconds into the attack, when that attacker had logged in as the user from an unusual location device, XDR would have spotted that. We'd have disabled the account, would have automatically blocked it. That would have stopped the attack in its tracks. And we'd have phoned the IT manager, so he wouldn't have been able to ignore us quite as easily. We'd have phoned the IT manager, given him all the information, so he was able to go through and investigate, change passwords, remove emails, whatever it might be, give the user maybe a smack on the hand for logging into a dodgy site. But either way, the attack would have been stopped. The 4 days later, the phishing campaign would never have been sent, because what we've done is stop the attacker's attempts. And likelihood is that they're opportunistic as well, right? They're going to pop over and try somebody else. Now, the way I always consider Office 365, and I think the way we all need to consider Office 365, is that I always use the analogy of it's like your house, right? Office 365 is your house. You've got to protect your email. We're going to lock our front door. We're going to maybe put a Ring doorbell on if we want, maybe a higher level of protection. You're not leaving your front door open when you go out of the house. That's the email security. Need it. It's absolutely a requirement. You are never going to leave your front door open. But the reality is the way attacks have changed and the way attackers have changed their approaches, locking the front door isn't enough anymore. What you now need is a security team who are going to be circling your house 24/7, watching to let you know that the bathroom window has been left open and somebody's trying to sneak through the bathroom window. Or actually your back door lock is now, come undone, and suddenly we need to, prevent that from becoming a potential risk. That's what we're doing with XDR. We are the security team who are going to be walking around your house 24/7, keeping an eye on all of those potential areas of risk and all of the areas that we know attackers are exploiting to gain access. So the reality is with Office 365, it is so critical to so many of our businesses, and that is why attackers are going to attempt to breach it. But the beauty is there's always additional security that can be added. Now, another thing that Rob's going to go into in just a second is Entra ID backup. And to bring us back to that cybersecurity hygiene, this is the recover point, right? We need recovery, we need backup, we need to be able to get back online to protect against, malicious attacks that are going to try and remove our applications and data, but also it's anything that potentially is happening accidentally internally. Recover is a really key pillar that every single company and every single customer needs, regardless of how good the rest of their protection stack is. So with that, I'll pass over to Rob, who'll be able to go through the Entra ID backup in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, so obviously, with what Harry covered with the managed endpoint, and obviously the XDR cloud security, that builds a lot of the automation for you. It gives you that peace of mind that you have a team of experts, working around the clock. But obviously the backup piece, as Harry mentioned, is still critical. Obviously, we want to start with obviously a brief summary of what Entra ID is. And before we jump in, we want to take a minute to kind of consider what Entra ID is and what it does for your business and why it's so critical. And as most of you probably know, Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, is the center of the wheel for any organization that's using Microsoft products. It's included with many 365 license types, so it's widely deployed. Now, it's responsible for controlling authentication and authorization to many of the Microsoft services you probably use every day, like the Azure portal and 365, to name a few. Yeah, it's technically referred to as an identity and access management service, but to give you a sense of scale, in a recent Microsoft investor call, they stated that there are over 400 million paid Microsoft 365 seats in use worldwide, which is why we've worked to provide a solution for Entra ID backup. Entra ID is uniquely vulnerable because it holds the keys to your kingdom. If something goes wrong, whether it's due to human error or malicious acts, an entire organization can be rendered to a standstill. Furthermore, if a malicious actor gains access to Entra ID, they can potentially gain entry to other applications, confidential data used by the organization, including external resources. So let's go a bit further in. So before we jump into kind of more, I wanted to call out a few common use cases for Entra ID. The first is leveraging the AD portion to dictate which users and groups are allowed to access which resources and how they can successfully authenticate to those resources. Entra is more than just users, but it integrates across Intune, Defender, conditional access policies. It also controls user access to external resources, as well as gatekeeping user entitlements through role-based access control. I wanted to include this slide to show how Entra ID is tied deeply within many common parts of 365. How do all the parts interlinked within the tenant? And all roads lead back to Intune, which is at the center of managing devices, making sure they're registered, they have the correct software running, ensuring they have endpoint protection enabled, and acting as a sort of mobile device manager. And starting with device management, which dictates all the devices that we have that are allowed to access our environment. And when a device gets onboarded, it gets a BitLocker recovery key, which is required to unlock any BitLocker encrypted drive. Now, that's not something that you want to lose. Anything a user or device does in the environment generates audit logs, which Microsoft keep for 30 days in most cases. This is significantly shorter than the amount of time that Gartner recommends to be able to reliably trace back any suspicious activity in the environment. And again, shameless plug for our XDR cloud, but that can monitor these logs and alert on suspicious activity. Now, as we shift back to the left-hand side of the chart, we have named locations. Think of these typically as office or branch locations. Since these offices usually have additional security from your average coffee shop Wi-Fi, for example, you may not need to require such strong authentication for devices connecting from those networks to your resources. So why do you need Entra ID backup? Entra ID is a primary attack target for malicious actors. 9 out of 10 successful intrusions target Entra ID. To find vulnerabilities, and obviously thwart countermeasures in real time. And Microsoft told us in their latest digital defense report that Microsoft user accounts are attacked on average 4,000 times per second worldwide. Now, that is mind-bending. I can't quite fathom, 4,000 attacks per second, but it confirms that the threat is real and it's constant. So it's not a matter of if, but when, which means that having good security policies and systems in place like XDR, but also a good backup can be the difference between a fast recovery and a business-ending event for a customer. By way of example, a particularly scary attack that was recently reported to Microsoft is the Silver SAML attack. Within Entra ID, Microsoft provides a self-signed certificate for SAML response signing. The researcher said that alternatively, organizations can choose to use an externally generated certificate, such as those from Okta. However, that option, introduces security risk. Any attacker that obtains that private key can forge any SAML response they want and sign that response with the same private key that Entra ID holds. With this type of forged SAML response, the attacker can access the application as any user. And just like we needed to back up old hosted AD servers back in the day, we need a way to keep the business running. And that's one of the things that our MSPs have really found powerful is the understanding of the risk from their end users. Back in the day, and I'm showing my age, but we always backed up our file server. We'd back up our domain controller and our AD. It was never questioned. You just did it. And as people have moved those to the cloud, there's that underlying assumption again that Microsoft are protecting Entra ID, that they're backing up the elements that you've built. And obviously that's not the case. And since Entra ID controls authentication to all of your apps, it's critical to be able to revert back if there are any misconfigurations, accidental deletions, or a cyber attack, for example. Backups help extend protection beyond Microsoft's limited 30-day retention policy. Microsoft have made it very clear they're not liable for lost data. They'll keep the lights on, they'll keep the services running, but any retention of data is on the tenant owner, it's on the MSP, it's on the customer. And we all know that compliance and regulations are a moving goalpost. Some regulatory agencies are starting to require some level of backup for Entra ID. And I don't think it's crazy to assume that cyber insurance companies aren't going to be too far behind. If we look at business continuity, it controls access to critical data such as authentication and authorization to first and third-party apps. It ensures that you can restore data quickly and keep your business running. And obviously, not backing up Entra ID means that you're relying on that recovery within Microsoft. Ransomware protection. Attackers increasingly target identity systems to access sensitive data or disrupt operations. Backup can be a safety net to recover user identities, roles, and permissions. And again, 9 out of 10 successful intrusions target Entra ID first. Accidental deletion or misconfiguration. Again, we always talk about threats from bad actors, and that is definitely a huge risk. But also things like misconfiguration, especially for an MSP where you're handling dozens or hundreds of customer tenants, and there's this constant requirement for change and adaptation, for example. Mistakes happen. It's one of those things. We've all done it, and if you haven't, then you're better than me. But we all have made mistakes when we're doing this kind of work, and being able to recover from those is critical. And then obviously from a compliance and auditing perspective, many regulations require companies to have a backup plan for critical system. And Entra ID often falls under these requirements because it controls access to sensitive data and applications. I mean, even that 30-day retention I mentioned before, it's relative to soft delete versus hard delete. So 30 days is assuming that we haven't touched data to force a hard delete, which if we did, then it's gone. Users, groups, applications, they fall into that soft delete bucket, where you have that 30 days to go and recover it. Anything else that we've talked about, all of your Intune policies, conditional access, for example, they're hard delete. Once they're deleted, they're gone, which is pretty scary. And anything that has been hard deleted, it can't be recovered through Microsoft and it needs to be recreated. And for anyone that's been through building those policies, that's a pretty daunting job. Have you got documentation of every single policy for every single customer you have, and how long would it take you to go and rebuild those if they were accidentally or maliciously deleted? The protection of Entra ID objects that are subject to misconfiguration and accidental deletion. It extends protection beyond that 30-day limited retention policy, as I said, and it's a single solution. So, again, it's that ability to not only back up, the existing 365 data, your Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. We've just launched protection for Microsoft Planner free of charge. It's all handled through that same interface. I thought a few, real world examples would be good. We've got two policy types. So you've got device compliance policies and device configuration policies. And these control how devices are used within your organization to keep data security by enforcing specific rules. The real world example, well, a company policy requires devices to have updated endpoint protection or antivirus and encryption to access network data and resources. If either of these policies were accidentally deleted or lost, that could cause a serious gap in your security posture. Maybe we're not checking to see if antivirus is installed, for example. I mean, conditional access policies are digital security rules that help protect an organization, ensuring that only the right people using the right device in the right situation can access company apps and data. If someone logs in from an unusual location, like a different country, they might need to verify their identity with a second step, like MFA or biometric authentication. Again, if we lost or deleted those policies, that could cause a massive gap in security posture, meaning that your accounts could be logged in from anywhere in the world, and you lose those GeoIP lockdowns. I mean, this is something that we see a lot, and this isn't pointing the finger, this isn't throwing the blame, but we had a large gas utility company with around 6,000 employees. They are responsible for delivering natural gas to 11 million customers, and one of their engineers, on a very bad day, accidentally deleted 28 security groups, each containing thousands of users, including the entire executive team. Um, you know, he was meant to go in and delete 28 users, ends up deleting 28 groups. They had Entra ID backup in place. They were running a POC, and they were able to get back up and running within 40 minutes. And again, it just shows the power, because we all do it, right? I mean, we use single sign-on with Entra ID to access our HR systems, our finance systems, our ticketing systems. It's not just being used to log into Microsoft. If you were to turn that off, what impact does it have to your customer? What impact does it have to you internally? It's a huge risk, and obviously something that the customers do understand they need to protect. We put a lot of focus in the the cybersecurity space on the bad guys, the bad actors, as I said before, but most of the time we're our own worst enemies, and again, just trying to reaffirm that accidental deletion is still one of the top reasons people will need a restore. You need to defend against both. Um, One of our customers lost an entire set of objects from their authentication policies due to a simple misconfiguration internally. It resulted that Intune didn't allow any of their remote workers to access anything, which, again, brought them to a complete standstill. Policies aren't, one of the pieces that Microsoft makes available for recovery through Azure. It leaves our partners to need to rebuild. So again, just highlighting that backup is critical. Now, how we can help, and I'm sure a lot of you are already protecting your customers with Barracuda Cloud Backup, is Barracuda Entra ID Backup. We released this in the summer, which sadly, looking outside, feels like a lifetime ago. There are two versions here. So if you have an existing Cloud Backup subscription, or you have one of our email plans like Premium or Premium Plus that include Cloud Backup, you can apply Entra ID standard at no additional cost. That's how important we believe that protecting Entra ID is, that we're willing to do the fundamental pieces for free. Now, obviously, you can charge a customer for that if you like. That's completely down to you, but we are providing that to you as the MSP at no additional cost. Now, we've also launched the premium tier. So Entra ID Premium, is covering all of the elements that we've talked about already. At its core, Entra ID includes the following objects, and that's what's protected with Entra ID Standard. But hopefully, as you've listened to me kind of waffle on, it contains so much more, and this is what we're protecting with Entra ID Premium. This is something that a lot of our partners are having, immediate success with. Tiny sales cycles because the end customer understands the risk. They understand what happens if they can't log in to any of their systems, and they understand that historically they used to protect Active Directory, and actually from having a lot of customer calls and partnering up with our MSPs to speak to their own customers, a lot of them weren't aware that this was even a thing. They just assumed, as I said before, that it was protected by Microsoft. Um, Hopefully, this slide kind of simplifies the difference between the two. So the Entra ID standard is protecting who you are. It's protecting the admin units, the groups, the roles, the users. Entra ID Premium is also protecting who you are, but it's also protecting the policies, the applications, and the devices. Now, let me just run through and give you a very quick summary of just how easy this is to manage. So this will look and feel familiar to a lot of you that are already using Cloud Backup. It's all managed in the same place. Again, I've got all of my items and groups that are protected on the left-hand side. And as you see, as I go into those, I can navigate and search. For anyone that's seen the new Restore browser, Entra ID is supported with that as well. So again, it gives you those more granular search options. And again, if I wanted to go in and run a restore, I'm selecting, for example, the conditional access policy and getting that restore run. Now, in this example, I wanted to go in and break an enterprise app or modify an enterprise app. So in this scenario, we're going to rename it. Save those changes. You can see that that's been applied. Now, within the Entra ID backup, I go into my app registrations, I find that original app registration, and I can run that restore. And these are the big thing for me here as well. These restores are lightning fast. So when your back's against the wall and you need to get something restored quickly, again, you've got the ability to go in and do that and get the customer back up and running as quickly as possible. Now you can see from the reports the restore has run. You can see how small the file was. We restored that back to the original location. It's all confirmed on the dashboard. When I go back into Azure and refresh the page, you'll see the app is restored. And again, that's just a very small example, but it shows you how quick and easy it is to navigate. And, something that we pride ourselves on is that simple to buy, deploy, and manage. Now, you can be selective in terms of what's protected. I'm not entirely sure why anyone would want to exclude something from backup, but by all means, you have that flexibility if you need to. And obviously, from the BitLocker keys, we can't restore those back to the original location. You have the ability to export. So I can go in, I can export that BitLocker key. That's going to decrypt that backup file, make it available for me to download. Again, you can see that export's running. Now that's finding the file, that's decrypting it and making it available for me to retrieve. Within the reports, again, that export is running. There you go, you can see that export's now available. And when I click on download, that gives me access to that file in JSON format. I can open that and there's my BitLocker key. So this is really designed to be as simple to use as we can possibly make it. I think the talk track is there for you to go and have those conversations with your customers. We've also built a short 3-minute video. It's customer facing. It doesn't talk about price. It doesn't talk about professional services or anything like that. It's simply designed for you to send to your customer to explain the risks that we've covered on the webinar today. That's everything from me. I believe we've got some time for Q&A, if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and Harry, obviously, for a fantastic presentation there. Yeah, we do have a couple that actually have come through, so we can get to those. And obviously, if anyone else has got any they haven't asked yet, then obviously now's a great time to get those submitted. So let's go with the first question. It might be one for you, Harry. How does managed XDR help organizations with limited SOC resources or skills?
Really good question. Which I would just start by saying that's most MSPs and most customers, right? Most people don't have the resources for a fully manned 24/7 SOC. And as we know, everyone's wearing multiple hats, right? Certainly within MSPs. And the beauty is that that's what our SOC is here for, right? Our SOC is here to extend the resource, to be the additional team that can help your team out. The beauty of the way our SOC operate is that any of our customers, any of our XDR customers have access to them 24/7 as well, right? There's no limit to how often you can call them or, what kind of questions you can ask. They're there to be the extension to your team that you don't have the resource for yourselves. So it's very flexible, and that's exactly what the SOC is intended for.
Super. Nice answer. Thank you, Harry. The next one looks a bit more like for you, Rob, around Entra ID. So, the question is, what's the feedback been like so far from MSPs on Entra ID backup?
I mean, I'm obviously going to say it's been positive, but the reality for me. So I was at a small lunch and learn event. We had 10 to 12 MSPs in the room, and it was just having a conversation about their businesses and what's changed. And the feedback from everyone in the room was it's the first product they've kind of gone out and talked to their customers about, where they instantly just get it. They don't have to kind of go in and explain A to Z as to what it is and why it's valuable. Actually, identity protection is critical. Um, and we're seeing some really big success with MSPs bundling Entra ID backup with XDR Cloud and managed endpoint, because it gives you that protect, monitor, remediate, recover, all in one kind of conversation for really aggressive kind of bundled price. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's very rare, I think, that you can go and take a new service to an end customer that's not technical and have them, immediately understand, the power of it, and that's the feedback we've been getting.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. And then the final question we have is how does Barracuda's 24/7 SOC team interact with customer IT teams during active incidents?
Um, I suppose, yeah. Again, the SOC are there to assist, right? So it would really depend on what the MSP or what the customer wants out of the team. The part of the service and part of the offering that we have is that the SOC can be on a Zoom call throughout, right?
Mhm.
Typically, when we see, an incident ongoing, that will trigger kind of high level alerts. It will trigger a lot of noise and a lot of action. And typically what will happen is the SOC will be offering, Zoom calls, sessions to share screens and to make sure that the customer is getting what they need. Now the beauty is that the SOC are there to do all of that, right? So the customer, the customer or the MSP, depending on who we're contacting, can jump on a Zoom call and spend 3 hours with the SOC team. I mean, typically for anybody who's dealt with incidents, it will be, longer term, sort of 2 to 3 weeks. There's a whole incident response kind of guide that SOC will follow, which kind of ends with lessons learned, right? So post incident, we'll go through with the customer, what happened, what we've learned, what the ongoing advice will be and stuff like that. So again, part of the offering is that the SOC are there to assist and to guide. And the beauty is that, you don't necessarily have to pay more for jumping on those Zoom calls and having the SOC available to you while you deal with the incident. So very flexible.
Super. Thanks, Harry. I think that completes our Q&A. Unless anyone's got any final questions, feel free to add them now. Or if you think of any later, we can obviously answer those offline. But I think that wraps it up for today, guys. Thank you, Rob and Harry, for your great presentations.